Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Sox Machine Live, a special edition Sox Machine Live, as we are streaming on our YouTube page at youtube.com/Sox Machine on this Wednesday night, October 5th. I'm Josh Nelson alongside Jim Margalus. And Jim, the Chicago White Sox 2022 season is over. Finally.
Oh, no. Say it ain't so.
Please come back.
One more game.
Yes, the 2022 season is finally over for the Chicago White Sox as they finish 81-81 in the most White Sox way possible by losing 10-1 to the Minnesota Twins. And in the final day, this has suddenly became a very hot topic. Jose Abreu. We talked about this in our previous episode on Monday, Jim, posing the question, is this the last time we're going to see Jose Abreu play in a White Sox uniform? And we both say it is. And based on the comments that Jose Abreu is providing when he's being asked this question for these last final home games, it sounds like the future is very unclear for Jose Abreu to come back. Maybe he knows that these are the last games for him in a White Sox uniform. However, he doesn't play the final game. And not only does he not play the final game, he doesn't even come out to be accepted as a standing ovation for fans. All we see him is that the hoodie is up. He's been mostly sitting in the tunnel in the clubhouse, and then he throws some shirts at the end to fans, and then he ducks out. And manager Miguel Cairo says it's because that they were respecting Jose Abreu's wishes. He didn't really want a send-off. And how do you feel about this, Jim? From someone that's in Nashville and is watching all the games on TV, how do you feel about this?
It's weird. I get the whole idea of, respecting his wishes, and he's been the consummate pro. So, he's done everything right by the White Sox. So the White Sox should do right by him. But you also have to do right by your customers. And if, Jose Abreu is the primary reason why thousands of fans are there for one of the most disappointing seasons, anybody can remember, and sticking it out through a terrible start to the game, hoping to see one appearance, whether he comes out to first base, takes some warm-up throws and then leaves, and doesn't even, have to stretch, just to be able to be out there and get a round of applause. Like, it seemed like that should have been something. Like, I don't get the, he's wearing the uniform, but he's not wearing the uniform. Like, he's wearing a hoodie, you're not even seeing like Abreu 79 on the back. Like, it's a weird way for it to end. And, I think, on the other end, you had the Cubs with Wilson Contreras and like two teary goodbyes because at the trade deadline, he didn't go anywhere. And so he has another, farewell at the very end. That's, just as emotional. And that's a little bit overdone, but you would think after 9 years and Abreu being, the primary jersey seller and the reason to watch for so many years, and two rebuilds, one that failed, one that might be failing, and him being like the one thing that's kept it all together. You'd think there'd be more of something. Maybe the White Sox didn't want to do a video tribute because that might signal that they're done with him. So maybe the White Sox didn't want to do anything, but like Miguel Cairo, like he's barely been here. Like, it's kind of a weird thing. Like, it's his decision, but he's been the manager for a month. He's been around for, it just felt like a disconnect between the dugout and the clubhouse and the customers that, there should have been more. And, maybe the White Sox fans could have done more. Maybe they should have, demanded that Jose, just do the Jose chant for 3 innings until, somebody comes out to shut him up. But aside from that, like, White Sox fans have been asked to do so much already with this rebuild that, like, forcing Abreu to come out versus just give the fans something to cheer for. The end. Like, do a Joe Mauer thing, ceremonial. Doesn't have to be, much of anything. Just, I don't know. It's weird. And I feel bad for, like, if that's the reason why fans went to the ball game and, stuck it through a 10-0 deficit that became 10-1 at the very end. Like, yeah, it's not good.
It's very White Sox. I will say that.
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, the White Sox love celebrating themselves and love the sentiment and the schmaltz. So it was, White Sox in that was mishandled, but also un-White Sox in that they did not get enamored with their own sentiment and history.
Well, they played. So this is where it was weird. Second to last game of the season, Abreu, I guess we're assuming his last at bat in a Chicago White Sox uniform. And he's coming up to the plate and they're playing Tina Turner's Simply the Best. And it caught me off guard because, again, we've been watching Jose Abreu play with the White Sox for 9 seasons. We know the walk-up music for Jose Abreu. And I didn't know what that hinted at. And I just thought, well, this is odd timing because there's one more game left to go. Why are you sending him off now? And on my walk home from the stadium, and I checked Twitter, and Cairo says that Abreu's not playing the final game. I became a meatball fan for a brief moment. Like, what do you mean he's not playing? WTF, White Sox and Jose Abreu. And yeah, it is this weird situation of like, what do you owe the fans? Even if you are uncomfortable saying goodbye, or maybe you don't want to say goodbye because you don't know what the future holds. Maybe you are coming back to the White Sox. Maybe you are not. And based on Twitter and, his send off and the images that they put on social media, right, for the Chicago White Sox on behalf of Jose Abreu, those seemed like he was saying goodbye. So I don't know. It wouldn't take much effort for him to come out of the dugout, maybe for the 9th inning or after the game ends, and he just waves to the crowd. And it could be one way of just saying goodbye, thank you for watching me this season, or it could be goodbye. Best of luck next season. I'm going to be signing with another team.
Yeah, I mean, it could be like just not even necessarily goodbye, but hey, it's the only position player worth a damn all year. It's kind of what it was. I mean, like you look at, Eloy Jimenez had some moments, Andrew Vaughn had some moments, but like when it comes to durability and production, like Abreu was the only one who offered the combination of both. So, that's why it's weird, he plays 158 games a year, 160 games a year, hates being on the lineup, but last game of the year, like when fans, most want to see him, he's not there. And I get that, his wishes are important, but yeah, I mean, like some things, like it's not necessarily about him. It's not about only him, especially like when you have, paying customers on the other side, it's about them as well. So I think there was probably some compromise that could have been reached to minimize the awkwardness, but also say like, here's one last thing you have to do. And then the White Sox aren't paying you anymore. So you're free to go.
Yeah. Well, another thing that we have to be mindful of is that Davis Martin, who started the last game for the Chicago White Sox, did not have a good game at all, gave up 6 runs in the first inning and got yanked out in the second inning because of injury. And the White Sox are reporting that it is a sore right bicep. Ladies and gentlemen, I could not, if I had an alarm by me, Jim, I would be pounding that alarm. This is a red alert. And let's hope with some rest that it's nothing significant, but usually the bicep injury suggests there's something else bigger happening. It would just be so 2022 on the final day, someone that we think could be the number 5 starter or compete for the number 5 starter role for the Chicago White Sox in 2023 now has suddenly a significant arm injury.
Yeah, it's that was the top of my recap, was saying that like Davis Martin is one guy I think who could walk away from the season feeling great about what he accomplished and how he fits in the team going forward and what he offered them, and overachieving and going from off the radar to a credible 5th starter on a team that had some postseason aspirations, and though those aspirations evaporated and they could not make good on them, come close to making good on them, like he wasn't the reason why. So he could hold his head high. And then, yeah, sure, he leaves his start in the second inning. His ERA jumps more than a run. And, now you're looking, it's weird, like how much one star changes things, because like if he left or if his season ended after his fine start in San Diego, he's got a 3.65 ERA and throwing 120 something innings, I think, between minors and the majors. And looking good for it, you could say like, yeah, he's a credible fifth starter, or maybe he's a sixth starter and you have like another Vince Velasquez signing to give him, keep him honest and see if there's somebody else who he can, also try to, because Velasquez, like, I think they had some bigger plans for him before the lockouts, basically ruined their entire offseason for maybe prepping him for the season. Velasquez actually ended up being like fine, or like exactly Vince Velasquez, no more, no less. So, I mean, like, I think the White Sox, when it comes to that signing, they got what they hope for from him. But I could see like a signing where they just, have a couple extra candidates for the fifth starter spot and say, okay, best man wins. And but now you have him with a 4.83 ERA, and because of the bicep issue at the very end, it's like, on one hand, you don't want one game to decide your decision, just how you feel about a guy one way or another. But yeah, as you mentioned, bicep is sometimes it's shoulder, sometimes it's reflective of more. Like sometimes like forearm tightness reflects an elbow injury. Like bicep is also often linked to something in the shoulder. So yeah, they minimized it because it's the end of the season, and there's nothing preventing him from taking his next start because there are no next starts for the year, so they can kind of mask it if they want to. But it's something you have to keep in mind. So I think when it comes to the fifth starting job, I think probably going into the season or going into the off season and then thinking about spring training, you really can't afford to have him have the inside track for the fifth starter job.
Well, I think you can if you believe in his performance, but now if he's hurt, you are right, you can't.
Yeah.
And the thing about the White Sox is they don't have starting pitching depth. Now it goes to Sean Burke. I mean, the White Sox are lacking so much on the starting pitching depth front. They didn't have enough starting pitchers for the Charlotte Knights. The Charlotte Knights had to throw 3 bullpen games in a 5-game series. They only had 2 starting pitchers. Your AAA team only had 2 starting pitchers for the season, and the other 3 games were bullpen games. This is, and we're going to get to Rick Hahn, but this is a concern. And of course, just like one more kick in the nuts for this 2022 season. We have to wait weeks, maybe months later in this offseason to learn on just the severity of Davis Martin's injury. Hopefully it is not. Hopefully with rest, he is fine. But we have seen this before. We saw it. A great example is Carlos Rodon. That was a bicep problem until it became a shoulder problem, and then it became Tommy John. So let's fingers crossed, and hopefully Davis Martin is not dealt with a significant injury, especially with how well he pitched in San Diego. It would make sense if he was hurt because he was pitching so poorly against the Twins. It's like, what happened here between San Diego and Chicago, arriving in Chicago against the Twins? Well, maybe he was hurt in that first inning, and that's why the Twins beat him up. So again, the White Sox lose the final game of the regular season 10-1. They finish second place in the American League Central with an 81-81 record. Will hold a parade between 35th and Morgan to 31st and Morgan, so we can celebrate this 500th season, because the White Sox front office promised parades. Damn it. If they're not going to deliver parades, we will, even though it may be in a joking manner. The White Sox lose the season series to the Minnesota Twins. So for those keeping score at home, they lost the season series to Cleveland, Minnesota, and Kansas City. So that's why you don't win a division when you can't win season series against your division opponents. So that is how the 2022 regular season ends for the Chicago White Sox. And now, at least for White Sox fans, we enter the offseason. The official offseason for Major League Baseball will begin shortly after the World Series, between that 10-day window of the last game the World Series played, and then players and teams that have options have to decide within those 10 days of what they're going to do before players are officially released into free agency, and then the market is open. We'll start seeing some trades, some players sign. I don't know how quickly the market is going to move. It's probably not going to move like it did last year pre-lockout. That was absolutely crazy. It was a lot of fun, but it was at a very crazy pace. But we'll see what the pace is 10 days after the World Series. But for a team like the White Sox, Jim, they got to start preparing. And it sounds like at the final, well, I didn't even know that was going to be the end of the year press conference. I would assume that after the season ended, the White Sox would have the end of the year press conference. But hey, Tony's talking, so why not? Let's go ahead and treat this as the end of the year press conference. The one thing that really sticks in my craw, and you laugh, Jim, because there's a lot of things that stick in my craw, but the thing that is just like jabbing me from Rick Hahn's press conference is the goal to say that we have to earn the fans' trust back. Now, the first thing that I thought of was, wow, season ticket renewals must be way down. And then he followed that up with, especially in the upcoming months and next season. Upcoming months and next season are two totally different points of time. The upcoming months is the off season and the moves that he's going to make. And then the season itself. For the front office, this offseason, we could say this almost every offseason. It's incredibly important. Last offseason was incredibly important. And we were ready to give him a D- before he traded Craig Kimbrell for AJ Pollock. This offseason, this is where I have to pose this question, because tomorrow, for those that are watching the live stream, Jim and I will be joining Dan Bernstein and Lawrence Holmes on 670 The Score at 11 a.m. Central Time to have a roundtable discussion about this. What's the objective for the White Sox front office? If they're going to try to gain trust back from the White Sox fan base, what's the objective? Are you trying to win the World Series in 2023, or is this offseason about shedding payroll?
I don't like, it almost sounds like it could be dangerous. Like, we're going to make a splash. Like, we're going to make so many moves, your heads will spin. Like, just, almost like a manic cycle after such a depressive season. And, really just want, something more balanced and level to understand that things are being done responsibly and soberly. But yeah, I didn't know what to make of his press conference. The things that, I took away is that he's been around for 20 odd years. Like, he can't even precisely, account for how long he's been with the White Sox and how long the Kenny Williams, Rick Hahn pecking order has existed within the White Sox running it. Like, that's a long time for a team that has accomplished so little, especially since 2005, like what they've accomplished, 08, 12, 21. I don't even count 20 because they were third place. Like, that team might've been falling apart. They might've needed to fire Rick Renteria by the deadline or by like the All-Star break, had there been an All-Star break during the 60-game season. So
they were the 7th seed. Again, that was an 8-team postseason in 2020. Yes, they were 35-25, but they were 18-2 against the Royals and Tigers, Jim. They were 17-23 against everyone else.
Yes. And yeah, they're falling apart towards the end. Like, first team to clinch, last team like get in, like first team to clinch a spot, but they just fell apart and end up in third place. So that wasn't a team that was really feeling sturdy. And then the AL Central didn't show up in all of 2021. So I mean, we talked about it before, like, that they're, especially during the first half of the season, when you realize like, they're taking a long time getting things going. And we realized, like, with last year in 2021, that their mettle really wasn't tested. Like, they spent the entire second half getting ready for a postseason, resting guys and treating games as or inconsequential, and series outcomes as inconsequential, as long as they had like a substantial lead in the AL Central, which they did for months. And by the time they got to Houston, and Houston basically undressed them in 4 games, it was a sign that, like, this team needs to get better. And they didn't really get better. And they haven't gotten better, like, over the last several acquisition periods. Going back, they drafted Garrett Crochet, and they traded for Kimbrell and Tapera, and they, just like they've gone for Joe Kelly and Graveman and all these relievers, Diekman, and just there isn't a like, they're just short on fixtures. I think that's what, this Jose Abreu, his absence, and thinking about what the White Sox lineup looks without him. Like, it's amazing just how few fixtures they've developed over this time. And, when I think the thing that stuck in my craw, listening and watching Haas talking about like how they wanted to give him executive of the year 2 years ago, and how they're talking that the World Series favorites now, they think they should be out of their jobs. Like, yeah, if it disappeared on you so fast and you hadn't accomplished anything before date, maybe it was a mirage. So, I mean, like, I'm not sure, some people didn't read it as condescendingly as I did, and I admit that I'm probably predisposed.
I'm with you, Jim. I did.
Yeah. I mean, like, but I admit, like, I'm predisposed to maybe take the most cynical read of a lot of things Hahn says. So, I appreciate other people saying like, yeah, I'm not sure about that because, perhaps it is a case where I'm skewed, but like, yeah, just, I really don't like when Hahn like invokes Twitter or public opinion or just like things that, he just inflates and then dismisses. Like, we had people saying that we should trade blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah. And who are those people? Nobody's like, they just, your record is your record. What people think of you doesn't matter, or what people wanted to see or what people, random, Twitter or Baseball America, what have you, thought you were doing, versus what you actually did. Like, that's what matters. So that's, I think, what drives me nuts is just, he falls back on like the unwashed public masses and how, easy they are to, go overboard. And it's like, who cares? Like, just win some games. He won his 700th game, but I think he's got like 890 losses on his record since he took over as GM. Like, the record says what it says, and it says nothing.
The one thing Rick Hahn accomplished was that he made Tony La Russa look better in that final press conference. After, Tony La Russa presented, he had his opening statement and he took blame for how this season went. And I appreciate that for someone that, he underachieved as a manager. He didn't do the job, and he admitted he didn't get the job done that he was hired and brought to Chicago to do. I appreciate being that accountable, even though the health situations make it a very difficult day for Tony La Russa. The day before your birthday, you have to retire again, and you have to let the public know there's a second underlying health issue that we don't know about that's preventing him from working full time in baseball again. I mean, that's a tough birthday. And then the general manager follows up with that. Yeah. And again, they're going to earn our trust, Jim. Rick Hahn is going to earn our trust. And when they make decisions, though, remember, it's a collaborative effort. It's just not Rick Hahn. It's Jerry, it's Kenny, it's Jeremy Haber, it's Chris Getz. So that if you don't like it,
Ron Kittle.
It's Ron Kittle, Ozzie Guillen. Because remember, if the next manager doesn't work, it was a collaborative effort. It wasn't my decision. But if it does work out, remember, it was probably my idea. That's how he wants us to handle this.
Yeah, bottom line is the Guardians pantsed him by 11 games. They weren't trying this winter to win. The Orioles, playing in a way tougher division, finished with the better record than the White Sox by 2 games. They weren't trying to win. Like, they punted on the winter. They thought like next year might be the time we're ready to go, but this winter we're still hoarding our resources and not putting forth a real major league payroll. And those teams had better record than the White Sox team, trying its best and spending more money than ever. And that's, basically, Rick Hahn went full John Paxson. Like, if I thought I couldn't do the job, I wouldn't be in this job. Like, who cares? Like, who cares what you think? Like, even if you thought you couldn't do the job, you wouldn't leave the job. It pays well. You live where you want to live. You're secure. You can just kind of repeat the same quotes. You show up once a month and you rely on your law training to not say anything of substance. And then, check out for 4 weeks, then come back into the picture and reheat the same statements. And, nothing improves, especially SoxFest. Now SoxFest not happening, and I don't think it is. Like, they officially tabled SoxFest or anything like it?
So based on the conversations that I had with White Sox personnel in San Diego, I think they are still planning on having SoxFest. They just didn't know where the location was. But as you mentioned it, I mean, usually it's hosted in January. We've hosted events, Jim. If you still don't know if you're going to have a fan convention in October, nor have you announced where it's going to be hosted, maybe you are right. Maybe it's not happening. I mean, for crying out loud, we announced where our next meetup is going to be, Cincinnati, Ohio, on May 5th to the 7th, 2023, to give everyone plenty of time and heads up of when this is going to be happening. So maybe because we don't know, maybe it won't happen. I don't know. I guess it's still up in the air. I think it's happening, but we don't have a site. And
is it going to be like in the Stadium Club?
Instead of a 3-day thing, it's just 4 hours.
Yeah. And it's like 50 people show up paying a couple thousand a piece.
Yeah. Oh my God. That would be rough. That would be rough. I really appreciate the comments right now that are coming in for those that are watching the live feed. If you're listening to the podcast feed, when we do have our live streams on youtube.com/Sox Machine, you can participate by sending us questions and comments. One of the things that was just brought to our attention from Timothy, he wrote to us, why would he say anything, he being Rick Hahn, of substance, when the one time he did ask me after the parade, people have hunted around his neck every chance they get. Yes, Tim, we will continue to do that because it was a ridiculous comment that he made in 2019 when they hadn't accomplished anything yet, but he was so smug and confident that they were going to reach the final destination, that his plan was absolutely foolproof and it was going to work and they were going to win a World Series title, and he would shove it in everyone's faces. And here we are. And October 5th, 2022, talking about an 81-81 White Sox team having to say goodbye to Jose Abreu because of financial restrictions the White Sox are going to have to operate for next year, because they're paying Joe Kelly $9 million. They're paying Kendall Graveman $8 million. Jake Diekman's getting $3.5 million. They have no starting pitching depth because their AAA team only had 2 starting pitchers on their roster. Pets' heads are falling off. And this is where we're heading to for the offseason.
Yeah, I mean, they asked me about asked me after the parade comment. That's one case where I'm inclined to give him a little bit of a charitable reading, just because I took it to mean at the time that like their work isn't done until they win a title. Like that's how I thought, when I first read that. And you're kind of like the Frank Menachino F the home run comment, like which was very much about like Andrew Vaughn. They didn't want him to sell it for power. They thought he was getting some decent results with his at bats, and they didn't want him to get out of his current mode of progress to try to chase home runs. That got rubbed in his face. Like I thought there was a little bit of a misreading in Hahn's asking me after the parade, but it was also a case where like, it's also setting just ridiculous expectations to say like parade is the only standard of success when the White Sox haven't even accomplished, consecutive division titles. Like there are so many rungs below championships that could be construed as like, job well done, or this is where we want to be, somewhere between the vague idea of sustainable success. But, before parades, to where like, you don't get fans, amped up or like, I guess seeing it as the only rung and having Hahn be in a position where like, that's all he thinks is worthwhile, because, like this Dodger season, if we were following this Dodger season, 110 wins, like we'd be saying like, I hope they win it all, because it'll feel like a lot of people will be disappointed if they didn't win. But this season has been a hell of a lot of fun regardless. Like that's the test of a team, is 162 games. And when you win 110 out of those 162 games, that shows you built a hell of a team. And whatever.
Look at Queens on that point. Mets fans, that Mets team won 100 games. They won 100 games. They did not hold on to win the National League East. And there are people in New York saying the Mets 2022 season ends in disappointment. Okay, yeah, but your team won 100 games. You're hosting playoff games this upcoming weekend, and you're in the postseason, and you're the number 4 seed, and your team won 100 games. Like, how is that disappointing?
Yeah, it's just a zero-sum approach to the discussion that I don't care for. And when Hahn said, like, ask me at the parades, like, I rolled my eyes, just because, like, I hate when seasons are chalked up as a success or a failure based on whether they're the last of 30 teams standing, which is very, 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 very difficult to do. And the 162 game test, like if they won the division again by 12 games and they won 98 games, and then they, got knocked out in the ALCS or maybe even the ALDS again, you may say like, well, that was disappointing, but Hahn built a good team. Like there are some things that the front office can do, and then it's up to the players to, try to break down those smaller series and samples into favorable chunks for them. Like the front office can't be in the dugout for that. So, I mean, like the front office's job is to build good teams that fans feel good about going into October, and whatever happens, happens. So when he brought up parades, that drove me nuts on a personal level, because I find October baseball to be less enjoyable than September baseball. And to set up all for October when you don't even know if you can build a team to get deep into October. Just said like, that's running before he can walk, running before he can crawl even.
Well, it's like totally forget what happened last offseason. He had a terrible offseason last year.
Mm-hmm.
He made White Sox fans really angry with the lack of activity before the lockout, when we knew the lockout date was, and we're seeing all of these big free agents sign. Marcus Semien signed before the lockout. And what do the White Sox have to show for it? Kendall Graveman. Lockout happens, and Rick Hahn says when the lockout ends, our team will be ready to move and move quickly. That did not happen. And I also forgot about Lurie Garcia was signed before the lockout. Could not forget about that 3-year contract they signed Lurie Garcia for.
The day after my son was born.
Yes. And then after the lockout, it's Vince Velasquez and Josh Harrison. And let's throw in Joe Kelly, one for the road. And they're going to trade for Adam Hazley for outfield depth. Like, that's what you spent the biggest free agent signing period for the Chicago White Sox in terms of actual cash spent. That is what you spent it on. And now you're asking White Sox fans to trust you that they're going to make the right decisions and get this turned around. So no, chalk me as someone who doesn't trust Rick Hahn and the White Sox front office to make the right moves. And out of the two options, are the White Sox trying to win the World Series in 2023, or are they trying to cut payroll? I think it's pretty clear. They're going to cut payroll. Now they're going to twist it, and they're going to say, well, we think we can cut payroll and be competitive. No.
Yeah. I mean,
No.
it reminds me of my newsroom days where, jobs are vacated and never refilled, and layoffs happen, and we're not downsizing, we're smart sizing, or, we're going to be, running a tighter operation, but we're just going to learn how to be more resourceful with what we have. Like, and as we've learned in newspapers, like, you cannot grow by cutting, and some teams can not spend and shift things to internal solutions and, turn positions over to untested players and get by with that, kind of comb over weaker patches of their roster until that fills in with talent internally or, acquisitions later. But in this case, the White Sox don't have that depth internally. The depth that does show up takes a while to establish itself, if it ever does. And we've seen them spend a record amount of money and get nothing from it. So I don't trust Rick Hahn to do more with more. So I'm certainly not going to trust him to do more with less.
Yeah. Especially when he's cutting or moving players and saying the trade market is going to be more fruitful. We did that Sonic dance with Craig Kimbrell. We just went through that. And we just went through the trade deadline that the only player you acquire was Jake Diekman. And then you try to pass it off that I'm as upset as the fans are. Man, I am out of patience with Rick Hahn. I am just over it with him. And if he, and honestly, Jim, if it's a collaborative process and he's just a press secretary, please find another press secretary. Have someone else speak to the media. Even if Rick Hahn is part of the brain trust, that's fine. I just don't want to hear from him anymore. Find someone else to speak to the media and share what this aging, out-of-date brain trust is thinking and the upcoming moves.
Also, Reese McGuire might be the Red Sox starting catcher next year.
There you go. Excellent. That's great to hear. Jake Diekman is awesome. I'm glad he's on the team for next year. All right. Let's talk about the early thoughts on the offseason budget. So I am one to think that the White Sox should be cutting budget. And we mentioned this a few podcasts ago, but I'm going to bring up this point again. If you Google search COTS, COTS, contracts, White Sox, it's a very useful resource from baseball prospectus in which they track as far as the historical opening day payrolls for franchises. And you can see what it looks like coming ahead. It's a very useful tool, especially for those that participate in the Sox Machine offseason plan project. And I brought that up a few podcasts ago because when the White Sox have spent, when they have increased spending, the following year, they have cut spending by $20 to $30 million. As a reminder, the Chicago White Sox started opening day in 2022 with a $193 million payroll. by far the largest opening day payroll in franchise history by tens of millions of dollars. And if history holds true, Jim, I'm thinking the offseason budget is going to get the payroll budget's going to get cut by 20 to 30 million dollars. So we're going to be looking at a 165 to 175 million dollar payroll for the Chicago White Sox rolling into 2023. What are your early thoughts of what the possible offseason budget could be for the White Sox?
I'm thinking along the same lines, like 160, 170 in that range. No reason for it aside from just subtracting some salaries like Keuchel's off the books, Abreu's off the books. Yeah, perhaps they are able to offload Liam Hendricks or something like that to knock the number lower. But there is a lot of fixed money on this payroll, like the contracts to Moncada and Jimenez are there and taking up a lot. You have Lucas Giolito, a interesting decision to make with him entering the last year of arbitration. Like, he's a case where hard to see him traded, but I could see a team having an interest in him, versus, trading for or signing for a starter they don't think is going to be as good as Lucas Giolito in a prove it year when they need instant results. So I could see him maybe being moved and the White Sox trying to decrease the amount invested in that rotation spot if they don't think they're going to get that kind of number 2 performance out of Giolito. So there are some moves to be made, but it's going to take some clever work, some reallocation, some certainly lack of sentiment in order to get this done. You really have to, that's why I think a lot of fans, including myself, just want to see somebody else, because I think it takes somebody who doesn't know anything about the White Sox, or in terms of doesn't have an emotional connection to the White Sox, doesn't have an emotional connection to the players, looks at what they've done, certainly has seen them, has looked at film, has scouts looked at them, has had their staffers look at them, data, eye test, everything, just saying can Eloy Jimenez stay healthy for an entire season? Can Luis Roberts stay healthy for an entire season? Just trying to, use all of the information available without having the pride of having traded for Jimenez or having signed Robert getting in the way of exactly what those guys can do for your team. That's why I wanted to see somebody else in charge, just so you didn't have that overriding, we really want this to work because it'd make us feel so good if it did. There are a lot of things that might not work about this roster, and I don't trust Hahn to be able to tell that, because it seems like, between Hahn and Kenny Williams, they're really concerned with, or at least overly concerned with sticking it to fans, or really concerned with what people said they would or wouldn't do. And we've heard Hahn bring it up multiple times, they said we wouldn't trade with the Cubs. They said we wouldn't rebuild. They said, and we said you wouldn't sign a 9-figure contract, and you didn't do that. And you said that we wouldn't fire a manager in season, and you didn't do that. You still have done a lot of things. You still haven't done a lot of things we said you'd never do, because you don't do them, and you can't, and your whole organization can't, and your whole decision-making apparatus is designed to just obfuscate and delay and defray responsibility until nobody feels any heat. So there's plenty of reasons to still not trust you. So that's why I wanted them just gone, even though I didn't expect them to be, but just, when it comes to hopes, I mentioned this on Twitter, but I was just picturing, time and time again, just how good it would feel if somebody else were running this team. Just imagine the relief of not having any kind of track record weighing you down, oh, there really are endless possibilities because we don't know anything about what this new GM is going to do. It's so nice to think about. It's so nice to just be freed from that. And then, reality kicks in oh yeah, then I get the Aaron Bummer face after he walks off the mound, just oh God, yeah, at least 4 more years of this. And just until I, put in my service time to get a certain amount of pension. That's really what I'm thinking about here. Yeah, it's not good.
This episode's quickly becoming reasons we do not like Rick Hahn as White Sox general manager for this Sox Machine Live. But again, when we're talking about the offseason, we're talking about the offseason budget. For those that are planning, I've made my virtual whiteboard and try to make up, all right, if I working with the players that the White Sox currently have, what does the 26-man roster look like for 2023 as a starting point? And then that's where I start making moves and areas that I can improve upon. If AJ Pollock opts in, I'm at $170 million with the current players that they have, Jim.
Yeah.
If AJ Pollock opts out, you're at 162 million. So back to that comment that Rick Hahn made about building trust, especially the upcoming months. The White Sox, if they're going to add, they're going to have to rob Peter to pay Paul. They're going to have to move players that are in the current roster off of the roster to try to fix and patch other holes. So they got to punch a hole in one area of the roster in hopes of improving in another. And man, this is where your player development fails you. It's gotten better this year.
Mm-hmm.
It has gotten better. They produced 2 top 100 prospects. Unfortunately, one of them you're going to have to use next season in Oscar Colas. And one tried to improve internally in a corner outfield spot. And Colson Montgomery, I don't know if you're ready to trade him, but it's like just looking at these players. We talked about Jose Abreu's last game. I don't think Adam Engel's coming back. I don't think Jose Ruiz is coming back. When people ask who are the most attractive trade assets, listen, there's going to be a very good team that doesn't win the World Series this year because of high leverage issues. And that team, if Liam Hendricks is available, will be calling the Chicago White Sox about acquiring Liam Hendricks, because if he gets traded, his 2024 club option suddenly gets vested and he becomes a 2-year, $29 million closer. Well, look at how much money closers are making in the open market. Boy, Liam Hendricks is pretty cheap, and he's still one of the best closers in the game. So that is someone that other teams would be interested in acquiring from the Chicago White Sox. There's a lot of other players. Well, what about Yasmani? Nobody wants Yasmani Grandal. Nobody wants Grandal. No one wants Yohan Moncada. I'm not even sure if the White Sox truly want Yasmani Grandal and Yohan Moncada for 2023. They are paying them. So it's going to be, those guys are like impossible to move. But when you're starting to look ahead, and we're going to get these questions of like, what could the White Sox possibly do? Like Liam Hendricks is a name that I've circled on. You may have to trade him. Maybe you have to trade Kendall Graveman because he had performed at some point in this season and he's only owed $8 million. Do you contemplate moving Tim Anderson? He's really cheap, and the shortstops are not cheap in free agency if a team's looking to patch the shortstop position. But boy, if you want to just crater fan loyalty, trade Tim Anderson away in an offseason that Jose Abreu, you let him walk away. The fan loyalty, I forgot what that game is that everybody plays. The baseball general managing game that comes out
Baseball
every
mogul,
year.
Out of the park.
Yeah, out of the park.
Yeah.
That fan loyalty will probably go from where it's at, like what, 40 to like 4. They were to trade Tim Anderson.
Although if they trade Tim Anderson, I would have to respect the I guess willingness to move on, just because he's had trouble staying healthy, staying on the field. We saw them stick to him in the leadoff spot, even though he was a shell of himself from the groin injury. So I mean, we've seen what being over loyal to Tim Anderson looks like in the face of not getting results. So if they traded him, I would actually be intrigued. You have to see what the return is, obviously, and like just if they're selling for pennies on the dollar just to get out from under the contract versus actually getting somebody intriguing. Yeah, if they're looking just to cut costs versus actually like getting a talent back, like it'd be interesting. Like he'd be one of the guys I think I'd be most open to moving, just because when you lose 40 games a year from that position, and he's done that 3 out of 4 years, and the 4th year was a 60-game schedule. That is the one area to where like they might actually come out ahead by moving. So
it really depends on what kind of shortstop that you get. But I'm bringing these up as topics that we're going to be talking about all offseason, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
And when fans are getting ready for their offseason plan projects or trying to follow the news along with us at Sox Machine of what the White Sox are doing, I think at this moment we're bringing these topics again. We're going to be talking about this more in depth tomorrow on 670 The Score with Dan Bernstein and Lawrence Holmes in that roundtable discussion. But before we sign off here, obviously this is also a big topic And we've already talked about our short list for possible managers when the rumors were coming out that Tony La Russa was not going to be returning. The question I have for you about the manager, how quickly do you think the White Sox are going to move in finding a new manager?
I think it'll tell us something about their short list if, like, say, Joe Espada, who's the Astros bench coach, the Houston Astros make a long run in October, like, if they're truly doing a process where he's involved and they've identified him as like a compelling possibility, then they should wait until he can be interviewed and hired to make that decision. So I think, like, as long as it takes is a cop-out answer, but I think, when you have like Matt Quatraro in Tampa, if they make a run and he's on their list, like, wait it out. There's no reason to rush. We've seen what it looks like when they truncate the decision-making. Robin Ventura, Rick Renteria, Tony La Russa, like, that's bad. So I don't mind them dragging their feet. Like, I mean, last time around with La Russa, they took forever to announce his staff. Like, AJ Hinch was hired, and then, they announced the rest of the Tiger staff in pretty quick succession. Whereas La Russa, because the DUI charge was hanging over his head, everything was very piecemeal, and like, didn't understand like whether people wanted to work for him even, and what kind of candidates would be available for him to pick up, and whether he'd actually be able to be a White Sox manager, or whether he'd be serving like brief amount of jail time in spring training. So like, you had that hanging over everything to where like that dragged out the process. So in this case, I would like to see the manager process be the one that takes, a fair amount of deliberation and making sure you have the right guy. And then hopefully a seamless process of filling out the staff after that. But here's also hoping that, like, I saw Daryl Boston fielding a foul ball and joking it up and being like, oh, I hope that's the last time I see Daryl Boston, or last time I see Joe McEwing. Just a lot of guys who have been here for 3+ managers, and really, there's been no evidence of helping. So I just wouldn't mind wholesale changes above the roster level, because they need as much outside help as they can get. If it's not coming from the front office, it needs to come from hopefully the manager and who the manager knows, because I don't think the executive suites are going to be as open to getting new blood.
So Joe Maddon gets hired in 2 weeks. All right. Excellent.
Yeah.
I know I keep doing this to you. I keep bringing up AJ Pierzynski's name. It makes you ugh. I bring up Joe Maddon.
That's a new one that makes me ugh, because I hadn't really thought of that until I think it was Steve Greenberg in the Sun-Times said hire Madden, and like, no, I just, I didn't really react to it beyond that, just because like, it did seem like I want to get some angry tweets with this column. Like, it was bait, and I did not take it.
Yeah. We're going to be asked this question again tomorrow in 670 The Score, and who we think would be a good manager for the White Sox and what kind of manager the White Sox will need. So I know we're touching on a lot of topics here in this episode of Sox Machine Live as we say good riddance to the 2022 season, but Jim and I are also setting the stage in future podcasts and columns that we're going to be covering the White Sox during the offseason on SoxMachine.com. So yes, the season is over, but our work is not. And as we all know, as White Sox fans, it's only going to get more dramatic from here, and we'll see what the breaking news is all about, and we'll debate and get angry together on the types of moves that the Chicago White Sox make. I guess I should keep myself open to be surprised. We have been surprised in a positive way before by the White Sox, and that was before 2020 season. They really haven't surprised us in a good way lately. But I should still keep that door open to be pleasantly surprised by a move that the Chicago White Sox make. But the state of the Chicago White Sox coming into this offseason is in really shaky ground. Everyone that talks about this team, media and fans alike, nobody really has a good understanding of what direction the White Sox are going to take, especially if the business does not allow them to spend out of the mess that they're currently in, when everything suggests that maybe you should continue to spend out of the troubles that you currently have going into next season. And when you add in, it's hard to trust the White Sox front office, Jim. It makes for a really messy situation where you are second guessing everything that the White Sox do this upcoming offseason.
on the positive side, we are no longer in the minority of people who don't trust Rick Hahn. I think a lot of people are,
Huzzah!
yes, I think a lot of people are on the same page now. So I guess good for us. If you did leave us, bad reviews here and there saying that we're too negative, if you feel like taking them down, it'd be great. I'm just speaking of people who care about what things other people say. But no, it's just there's a reason why we've been skeptical this whole time of just, what we've seen. And, believe me, like our numbers are so much better when the White Sox are good, traffic wise, listens wise. Like there's no reason for us to not be leading the hype train if there were a hype train to lead. So, there's no money. I guess you can forge an identity in being negative for negative sake, but yeah, it's really just, there isn't money really to be found in that unless you're really clever about it. But I'm not. So that's what we got.
As one of our Patreon supporters, Azid Rec, wrote to us during the live stream, Rick Hahn, bringing people together.
Yeah, it very much is the Bulls. Like he went full John Paxson, and the end of the John Paxson, Gar Forman era, the last couple of years, especially Jim Boylan, like that was probably the most inspired community I've seen result from a bad team. Like the way Bulls fans reacted in the blogospheres and podcasts, like that was really inspired and great. And I really enjoyed reading it and just following the coverage. So there's that. So maybe we can generate our own, it's kind of like gallows humor, except nobody ever shows up at the gallows. We're just staring at empty gallows.
Well, you know what? Let's do that parade. Let's do that fake parade in December where we all bar hop between 35th and 31st on Morgan Street. Visit Antique Taco, visit Martinez's, end at Maria's, all share some beers and a good laugh about how the 2022 season went and agonize and what the winter meetings holds for the Chicago White Sox.
Dust off your high school brass instruments, just get a trumpet, a trombone, and march until the neighbors start yelling.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that will do it for this episode of Sox Machine Live, as we wanted to stream shortly after the last regular season of the 2022 season. We are very grateful for everyone that watched us and listened to our shows throughout the 2022 regular season. We got a lot more content coming your guys' way. We're not going to be every day like we are in the regular season, but you'll be getting 2 podcast episodes a week from us. There's a lot of news that's going to be coming up in October that Jim and I have to parse through and discuss. We'll also have our 2022 season player reviews, where we'll recap on how specific players did and then look ahead to 2023 by providing some constructive criticisms and pointing out some things that we like for them to improve upon, or we as fans and media should be paying attention to entering into the 2023 seasons. I love those in-depth conversations, and I think it was great to help us prepare for this upcoming season when we did them last off season, just to give you a taste of what's upcoming this off season. And of course, the off-season plan project is just a few weeks away on SoxMachine.com, which is always a blast to see, and how everyone else, as the acting general manager of the Chicago White Sox, would handle this upcoming off season for the White Sox. So those are the things to look forward to. And again, thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of Sox Machine Live. And if you enjoy our work and you want more, you can help support us at patreon.com/SoxMachine, where our Patreon supporters, they get more, they get exclusive content, they get ad-free versions of both the podcast and the website, and they also get new Sox Machine swag. And I am buying time on the stream so Jim can don the new swag we've been teasing about, and look at that handsome scarf.
This old thing.
It looks good.
Yeah, I'm very pleased. So they just showed up today, so I'll be putting the page up shortly, and Patreon supporters will be getting a note with a new promo code, especially those at the 5 and 10 war tiers, to let them know the discount codes. And so, yeah, be on the lookout over the next 24 hours or so.
Yes. And it's such a great idea, and they look awesome. So again, if you're a Patreon supporter, You can sign up at patreon.com/Sox Machine. You'll be the first ones to get the new Sox Machine scarves. You can follow us on Twitter. We're at Sox Machine. Please do follow Jim on Twitter. He is a couple thousand behind me, so please follow at Sox Machine as we try to get to 10,000 to unlock other features on Twitter. And if you watch Sox Machine live for this episode, please subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Sox Machine. If you don't get an opportunity to watch the live stream or don't watch the videos on YouTube, you can always subscribe to the Sox Machine podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, such as Spotify and Apple Music. Sox Machine Live is a production of SoxMachine.com, your home for all things Chicago White Sox baseball and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Alongside Jim Margalus, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for watching and listening.